Okay, good morning once again, everyone, and welcome to meeting 2 of the Healthcare Workforce Commission. We are so pleased to have you all here with us today. My name is Sean Walker, and I am happy to facilitate this meeting today. Before we move into opening remarks, I'll first go through a roll call of the commission members and then follow that up with information about today's format. So with that being said, commission members, after I call your name, if you will please respond. Scott Bulkey. Mary Chapman. Mary Chapman. I'll take that as a present. Debbie Dalton.
Present.
Sherry Danello.
Present.
Janae Dock. Janae Dock. Clark Hill. Clark Hill. Sean Little. Kaylee Noggle.
Here.
Sally Perry.
Present.
Pete Quinones.
Present.
Rick Roach.
Present.
Scott Steiner.
Present.
Tanya Sudia.
Present.
Jean Sumner.
Present.
Courtney Terwilliger.
I'm here.
Janae Dock. Janae Dock. Clark Hill. All right, thank you so much for that. And so now I'll move into information about today's format. So this is a working session for the Healthcare Workforce Commission members. Members of the public are welcome to attend. Unfortunately, at this time, we will not take public comment or questions. As usual, if the members of the public have any questions or comments about the material discussed today, you all are welcome to send your questions to the commission's inbox at hcwf.commission@dch.ga.gov. All right, so with that being said, I will turn it over to Mr. Paul Hinchey, who is the president and CEO of St. Joseph's Candler Hospital, who has been a very gracious host for us today, working with you and your team. You guys have been just phenomenal getting us set up. So thank you so much for that. And I'll turn it over to you for opening remarks.
Well, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Commissioner, we're thrilled that you're here. I have to applaud you getting out on the road, so to speak, and getting to ground zero of healthcare. This is where the action is. And I know it takes a lot for you to do that. And I think it's very complimentary. I hope you all enjoyed dinner last night. I found out that Scott Steiner was here, and I know how competitive Scott is. So we had to up our game. And I hope we didn't disappoint you, but welcome. As Sharon said, my name is Paul Hinchey. I've had the honor of being the CEO here for the past 30 years. I have to welcome all of you to the hostess city of Savannah. I thought I would start by telling you just a small part about our genealogy. We're at Candler Hospital. This is the first hospital in the state of Georgia. It's the second oldest hospital in continuous existence in the United States, and it is Methodist. We like to kid about that. We tell people that when Candler was founded, Jefferson wasn't on the nickel, he was in the White House. And so that gives some context of how long this hospital has been in existence. St. Joseph's, which is close to I-95, they're comparable, they're about 350 beds apiece, is Catholic, sponsored by the Sisters of Mercy, and it opened in 1875. So I just mentioned that to give you a little context about the roots in the community. like many of you, we are a unicorn. We're a particular unicorn in faith-based healthcare, where we are still locally owned and locally governed. And we are run by a group of Savannaians who have their hands on the pulse of what's going on in this community and care a great deal about the success of this hospital. We are also a 5-time national award winner magnet for nursing excellence. We're one of lab techs and pharmacists. And we've learned through experience, trying to keep it simple, that everything rolls to the bedside. That's just the way it is. Everything rolls to the bedside in a hospital. And we learned that, like all of you, when he went dark. Day one, happened at 3 a.m. in the morning. And if you can imagine 200 or so nurses in their 20s who have only grown up with an electronic medical record. And we went out to Staples and we went out to Office Depot and we bought every clipboard we could find because we were now charting and putting it at the end of the bed. And that's how we survived this without one mortality. And I mentioned that the pandemic juxtaposed with that cyber attack, because again, we've learned everything rolls to the bedside. And it's that caregiver team, which is what this workforce team is all about, that kind of protects that. The other situation I'd like to share with you, in addition to patient care, is that hospitals, in my opinion, this is my opinion, I hope Scott agrees with it, doesn't play a secondary role in economic development. Hospitals in Georgia drive economic development. And I'm currently the chairman of the board of Savannah Economic Development Authority. And we worked for the past year with Governor Kemp and Commissioner Pat Wilson to get this manufacturing plant here out on this mega site. And we were very fortunate to land Hyundai. Now, having gone through that process, these companies hire site selection consultants, and they go off into Chattanooga and they go off into Charleston and they rank you. And some of the most obvious things are, you know, the tax abatements and the water and the port and the density of industrial land around the mega site and things like that. But in that report card, there's a section on workforce development. A lot of people don't know that. You probably know that they want to look at the technical component, which is where the people are going to come from, like how you're working with Savannah Tech and, you know, Quick Start and things like that. But there's a section on there on healthcare. And we had to answer that. It's the first time that I saw it. And Hyundai was very, very interested in that because they were all benefited. And that was one of the criteria that we had to rank to get them into Georgia. So I'll just share that with you because that was an aha moment for me, that hospitals and what you're doing, I think the responsibility is binary, actually. I think it's patient care oriented, which is the most obvious to all of us. But I also think it serves a role in recruiting jobs into our state. And we are competing with other states to do that. I have to applaud, again, this commission. thrilled that Dr. Janello is on it. I'll just say that we'll be a partner with whatever you come up with. We're not looking for a handout. We'll roll up our sleeves. We'll do what you want us to do. We're here for the longevity of this community, the longevity of the state. So you can count on us. So welcome to Savannah, Georgia. It's great you're here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Henchy. Now I'll turn it over to Chair Nagel for additional opening remarks.
So number one, thank you to all the commission members for traveling and being with us today in person. I'm still a believer that productive conversations happen really well in person as opposed to always on a screen. So thank you. I know the weather has been a little challenging over the last day in different parts of the state. Again, thank you, Dr. Danello and to St. Joseph Candler for hosting us on this day, but it's last night and we got to really enjoy some great fellowship together and just have a fun time. As we didn't talk about healthcare, but just enjoyed each other's company. So what you'll see today is kind of, we've had 3 or 4 or 5 different events together, but from our public forums, our meetings. What's in front of you today is a pretty robust slide deck with an even more robust set of data and slides behind it if you really wanted to get into it. But we've talked about data, we've talked about healthcare shortages by profession around the state over the last several months. And so we're going to turn the corner quickly today into talking about what we've really assimilated from our conversations collectively and often one-on-one with each of you, as well as we've heard from the providers and advocates that we've talked to, both in public forum and then offline, as well as we did some interviews and have assimilated that information into really where there was the most consensus on key opportunities, levers, and strategies. We will spend as much time on talking about each of those and more that you want to. This is really not a lot of presentation coming at you. There is a lot of material that I hope we get through today, but really want you guys to drive this conversation because it'll be a quick turn before we come to our last meeting on December the 12th, where I hope that we'll have at least some sort of a formal, final yet draft version of what this commission's recommendations will be. Again, keeping with the mindset that like we can't boil the ocean. I'm still pretty resolute in the fact that the state can't pay for everything, and nor will that get us very far, but looking at the practical solutions that we can move forward and how we then tee those up for success into next steps. And so looking forward to your contributions today. Again, thank you to our hosts. Thank you to everyone else that traveled to be with us today. This might be the biggest group of interested friends we've had. So thank you for being here. And Sean, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Chair Nagel. And at this point, we will open it up to the commission members to make any opening remarks before we get into the actual presentation. Mr. Quiones, I believe you had some opening remarks for the group.
I do. Is the 3 PowerPoint pics available for the commission to see?
No, they weren't. No, we were not able to load those, Mr. Quiones.
Okay, no problem. Well, let me thank everyone on the task force for their hard work and the opportunity to come before you. At the last meeting, we had the representatives on EMS from GAMS, from GEMSIS, and they represent a broad section of the emergency medical providers in Georgia. And there are other groups, including GAPA, which is the Georgia Ambulance Providers Association, that has approximately membership, not quite as many, but they handle more of the total transport numbers for the state. If you would put one side by side, GAPA, Georgia Ambulance Providers Association, would do approximately.
So while we're waiting for him to log back in, I will mention that our December 12th meeting will be held at the Capitol in room 450. So we're looking forward to seeing you all there if you're able to make it. Do any other commission members have any comments they want to make before we get into today's presentation? All right.
Won't be your only chance.
Right. That's for sure. All right. So here you will see the agenda for today's meeting. We have a very packed schedule today, but we believe it'll be filled with great information for the commission members to discuss. We had our opening remarks. We will get into the framework for improving Georgia's healthcare workforce. Talk through the opportunity levers that were identified through conversations with the commission members, as well as have some targeted Q&A. I will pause very frequently throughout this presentation to open the conversation up for the commission members so that you guys can discuss the information and drive this conversation. We'll break for lunch, then we'll have a recap of the previous conversations, and then again, solicit feedback from you all on the information presented today. All right. So, as you know, each commission member had an opportunity to participate in interviews so that you can provide your insights on the potential opportunity levers and initiatives for addressing our healthcare workforce challenges. During these interviews, we identified the framework for addressing the healthcare workforce challenges in Georgia, and you will see this framework throughout the presentation. Efficacy. So those were the three main objectives after discussing your insights. And so as you move to the right of this page, you'll see the strategies that you also identified for addressing those objectives, as well as some opportunity levers or specific actions that we can take to achieve the strategies. And so today, our primary focus will be on discussing the opportunity levers to determine which ones we will include in the final report. Categories are those key segments on how the problems can be addressed in Georgia. So for example, we have here train new professionals. That's a way we can improve. A strategy for training the new professionals would be increase Georgia's educational capacity. An opportunity lever or the specific actions that we can take is by increasing the total seats and faculty availability, as an example. And then we have example initiatives that can be adopted and implemented by stakeholders around the state. So this is just a quick overview of what those terms mean. And today's discussion, as I mentioned, will focus on the opportunity levers. What we did was based on the interviews that we've had with the commission members. We identified three main levers that among all of you were in most alignment and had the most significant impact. That's the first category. Those are the three levers. And then you'll see on the next slide, as we go through the additional levers, we have 5 that we'll present to you today, and then an additional 10 for your offline consideration. But for today, we wanted to focus, and we are prepared to do a deeper dive on those 3 opportunity levers that had the most alignment among all of you with the greatest impact. So I wanted to pause right here to give you a chance to look at this information and share any feedback, questions, or concerns you have with these groupings.
If I may ask a question in reference to the offline consideration,
Mhm.
as we're considering these items that are here, how would you prefer us to provide feedback?
Will that be something we look at on the 12th?
So after this meeting, our McKinsey partners will be in touch with each of you. And that will be an opportunity for you to give that feedback for sure.
And Sean, I would say also, I mean, if there's something in here that you feel really passionately about that's not included, kind of as one of the top 3 or 4, even 5 things. That you want to make sure we have a thoughtful conversation about, just reach out to Sean or I as well, and we'll be happy to either jump in and join the call that you have with our partners, or you and I can have that conversation directly as well, and just kind of talk through some things.
Perfect. Thank you.
So just to read out the top 3, retain existing workers in the state, in the profession, and in the workforce. Increase total seats and faculty availability, it's number 2. And number 3, target a larger pool of candidate students with outreach and incentive programs. Does anyone have any concerns with those being the major 3 opportunity levers? Do you feel like any of the other levers need to be regrouped?
And that's not necessarily to say that those are the only 3 that are going to be in kind of our final report or recommendation. It's just those are the 3 where we collectively had the most alignment, and where there may be, from the data and from what we've looked at, may have the biggest opportunity and potential to sort of move the needle. But certainly we can bring forward or move around some of those things, or at least for discussion today. So please don't be shy. This is our forum and opportunity to really kind of hash through some of these things and make sure that you're all represented in what ultimately the commission puts out.
Good morning, Commissioners. Mayor Chapman.
Good morning.
Good morning. I like the 3, and as I read the items listed for presentation today, and even perhaps on the offline consideration, the 3 really positions some of the potential ones that are in the other 2 columns to turn into potential tactics. So I really do like how this is organized.
Thank you. Great.
Yep. Any other comments, questions?
My thought that I have is the target a larger pool of candidate students. Could that, or does that also include a larger pool of candidates for the healthcare workforce? So I'm thinking the different options as we try to remedy the workforce problem, the different options that are available to practice that we may not have done in the past, the virtual options.
Sure.
Maybe more students. Those, is that encompassed in here at all? Because that seems like a really.
So
critical need.
we may dive into that. We may be because we're actually going to dive into that one pretty deep today.
Okay.
So we'll take a look at everything that we kind of uncovered there and then layer that piece in too.
Okay. All right, so the deep dive on the opportunity levers. Again, these are the levers that had the most alignment across the commission members. And so we will do a deep dive on retaining the existing workers, increasing total seats and faculty availability, and targeting a larger pool of candidate students. So I believe there is wide consensus that we have a problem with retaining the healthcare workforce in Georgia. This slide supports that understanding. 57% of Georgia nurses stay in the state after graduation, compared to North Carolina, who has a 76% retention rate. So if we were to increase our retention rate to 76%, similar to North Carolina's, we would have approximately 3,000 additional healthcare workers per year in the state of Georgia. And why are they leaving? It is clear that the conditions in the healthcare workforce are impacting them wanting to stay. 47% of healthcare workers indicated that they would leave their roles within 2 to 3 years. Each year, 3.7% of healthcare workers are lost to retirement or are exiting the industry each year. Rising workplace violence. We talked about this during our forum and in meeting 1. 60% increase in the rate of workplace violence among healthcare workers. That's just astronomical. And healthcare workers are 5 times more likely to suffer workplace violence compared to the average worker.
John, I have a question.
Yes.
What is North Carolina doing that's different from what other states are doing to retain up to 76%?
And I believe that ties back to some of these example initiatives that we'll get into later. It'll speak to what's going on in North Carolina. Yep. All right. So retain existing workers. That's the opportunity lever that we are discussing now. An example initiative or 4 example initiatives that I want to open up for discussion now are create and market evidence-based loan payback programs for those who stay in Georgia for 4 years. Encourage employers to offer an evidence-based retention bonus that increases with role and years of service in the state. Connect Georgian employers and upcoming graduates to promote employment opportunities in the state. And also enhance the required safety training programs for all large care settings. So I'm going to pause here, give you all a time to ingest this slide and then open it up to conversation.
Good morning again.
Good morning.
As you can tell, I'm very interested in this.
Go ahead, Ms. Chapman.
One of the questions or the challenges I think that we currently see related to sign-on bonuses, retention bonuses and the like. States like North Carolina and other states, I'm from North Carolina, that recruit our team members, they pay those out. And so I just want us to consider sort of the value and the return proposition, because I think it will need to be very well thought out in terms of, are we just simply creating yet another infrastructure, again, for some of the more aggressive organizations outside of Georgia to, they pay sign-on bonuses. And if they recruit them, they say, well, I'll give you that as a part of your, as a part of your start. So I guess my statement is I support the notion of the additional dollars. I just think that we should call the question of, how much and when and how, because other states will rebuke that with paying it off.
Great, thank you for that, Ms. Chapman. Any feedback, questions about that?
Just to expand a little bit on what Mary said, I completely agree with her, but we can't get into a race so that we're outbidding each other. And so that tends to be what happens. So on the front end, you pay recruitment bonuses, and on the back end, you pay retention bonuses. I support retention, but I don't know how you get away from the competition of recruitment to get to the retention aspect, which is the way I'd love to see the industry go.
Have you looked at the factors that the students who stay in Georgia? What are the characteristics of a student who graduates and stays in Georgia? And are these nurses that are leaving the state from Alabama and come over to go to school here and go back home? Do you know the facts about what are the percentage of North Carolinians that go to North Carolina nursing schools versus the percentage of Georgia students who go to Georgia nursing schools? Do they stay in Georgia more? I don't know, we've never been able to be successful paying sign-on bonuses because you get somebody that's looking for a bonus and they stay for a few years and then they don't. So I agree. And I think the country doctor loan programs were a great idea, but they did get bought out by big systems and they didn't go to small towns. And so the state flipped that and now rewards them when they get there each year, which is a great thing. And that's working better, but still, I think you have to think about those bonuses carefully.
And I think it's covered later.
About the relocation and the moving. I mean, do we know, like she said, are these students that are from another state that are coming to Georgia for school and are gonna go back anyway? Or is there something really attracting them in another state, or is it, military and they're moving with spouses? I mean, do we really know the breakdown of these ones that are leaving, and why that is?
And how do we accept students into these? And I know some of that's covered later, but how do we accept students into these programs on the front end, knowing that they plan to stay?
I don't think we do. I mean, I think that's a piece of it, right? Like, I don't think anyone from, Sean, you might be the only one representing an educational institution, but from prior experience, and we'll certainly confirm with friends in those systems, but I don't think there's a ton of consideration for a student's post-graduation plans because they're driven by different economics, right? Like and so the goals are a little bit different.
Ask what the plans are after graduation in
Other than-
reference to healthcare.
Other than Mercer.
They do, I sit on the Georgia Healthcare Workforce Board, and Dr. Sumner has experience with that too, as well as that they do ask them as far as medical school coming out of residency. Some of this has already been done at that, so they've got some robust data. You can get on their website and look at this. Are we planning to try to incorporate, trying to work simultaneously with that group? Because I think
collaboration and input in the final draft as well.
mainly designed for rural areas is what their push is, right? So.
One of the things that I would like to make a recommendation for is similar to what was brought forward. We need to do an in-depth study on why because the intention is for retention. It is not necessarily keeping them from leaving the state. It's to also keep them from leaving professions, not just nursing, but I'm specifically referencing that right now. So I do believe that we need to have an in-depth study, partnering with different organizations as to why are you leaving the profession that you have chosen? What is the underlying reason? Is it workplace violence? Is it unsafe staffing? Is it having the resources available? In most instances, even according to the data that was shared here, it's not pay. So we can provide them bonuses, but it doesn't address the underlying issue as to why they were planning on leaving in the first place. As a healthcare provider, regardless of what sector of healthcare you're in, the first thing that you want to do is to provide safe care. And that means that you have the resources, the knowledge, the support in order to do that. We can address these better if we understand what those areas are. So instead of throwing money back for retention, I would like to see money put into the research and the addressing those reasons as to why they're leaving.
I think we heard during one of our public forums, and I don't want to call out names, but from one of our healthcare industry associations that presented, shared some information about what they're finding about folks that are leaving full-time employment, the challenge with PRN and contract staffing, and the lifestyle and the way that the work culture has shifted, not just the straight up retention bonus or the dollars. And so I think there's some real thought we need to have around that, or discussion on, and again, it gets different between this being a state healthcare workforce commission, what the state can do or would be willing to do, versus whether or not our report has recommendations for what locals and local healthcare community organizations should consider, right? The state is never going to dictate or put guardrails probably around pay rates, but or bonuses or things like that, or say that you can or that you can't, but collectively have some healthcare industry conversation on how to combat that collectively, right? Like, what are the other levers that you can all agree to apply some pressure to shift that dynamic a little bit? And I don't know what that looks like in a report or writing, but talking about workplace safety is certainly, I think, is an important one. And so I would ask, as we dive into this, think of ways, if there are things that this commission needs to recommend specifically, and I think that's where ultimately we need to get in the next week, is some specific recommendations. Is there something that's missing within our regulatory or legal framework in Georgia around healthcare workforce safety, workplace violence? Is that something that this commission wants to make a recommendation on? But we need to get to that level of specificity of what is that specific action that we're recommending. But Shad, to your point, maybe there also is a recommendation for further research, right? Like, given the time frame that this commission has been in existence and that our authority ends in December, nary enough time to do the robust research and or just assimilate the research that's been done by many others, right? Because there's certainly a whole body of work out there about this.
I can just tell you from my own experience in talking with 22-year-old nurses and talking with 60-year-old nurses on both ends of the continuum that workplace violence is huge. The 22-year-old that gets choked by a patient, had that conversation, will not come back to work and give up healthcare altogether. The 60-year-old decides they're going to take early retirement. And some of those are knowledge workers. So I am all about having the tightest, strongest laws in Georgia against workplace violence or violence in the workplace, and particularly in healthcare.
Very good.
I would agree with what you're saying about workforce violence. One of my little titles is security at the hospital. What I have found to be very difficult is to get the prosecutors to prosecute cases against these folks. There's always some reason. Well, they were upset because daddy was sick. They were, and I've never been able to get them to adequately prosecute anyone that we've had that has attacked our patients, attacked our staff. So that has been frustrating. We have good laws, at least in the EMS world, but to try to get them to prosecute those folks is difficult.
And often if the individual that's been attacked decides to prosecute in today's world, then they have to put their name and their address and all of that. And that becomes a real deterrent to pressing it to the fullest extent of the law.
I would also like to bring up in reference to violence, sometimes it's not just the patient or the patient's families or visitors, sometimes it is employees. So I know that we can't necessarily mandate for employers, but maybe, as you said, make a recommendation to hold folks more accountable for their behavior. There has always been a, nurses eat their young type of situation, but it has gotten to the point now almost where I hear stories from new nurses that there's really no discipline for bad actors in a hospital setting, no matter what their roles are, because they don't want to let go of a warm body employee. So they might just have a conversation, but the behavior continues. So it does have to be in-house as well. In some way addressed. I don't know that the state can necessarily do that, but that might be something as a recommendation to the hospital associations and other healthcare organizations.
One comment, certainly workplace violence is a large concern, but as we talk about possible solutions here, I think that to continue to ferret out the idea of loan forgiveness. What are those opportunities to really keep people in the state? I like it, for 4 years. The more we can do that, having those opportunities, those students are looking for that. They're looking for that opportunity. And if they make that commitment, certainly I'm biased, living in a small urban or rural area. But we have Albany State in Albany, of course. And most of those kids are from Atlanta or from big colleges, and they have a huge nursing program. They're going back to hometown. And so that the challenge is, right, how do we incentivize them? And you just can't, you can say, okay, how about a $10,000, bonus, or they're just not going to do that, right? Maybe if it was $50,000 or $100,000, they might, but that's just not feasible. So I think as if we can craft either new legislation, or I think really changes to existing legislation to include faculty that want to go for loan forgiveness for faculty, and fund the current laws or the current legislation that we have around loan forgiveness, and maybe with a special emphasis for rural or small urban or underserved areas. I think that could really make some progress.
Scott, what level do you think is meaningful? And we'll challenge y'all, put some of you on the spot and just iterate with me for a moment is that fully state funded, or is that like a matching fund? If a hospital pays half, will the state pay half? Are there ways to think creatively to stretch dollars? And what is $10,000 a year in loan forgiveness meaningful to someone? Cancellation, or it's probably forgiveness?
Here it said the average is like 28,000 or something. I'm not sure if that is, I think you'd find the healthcare community, hospitals or nursing, I think we'd be in favor of helping in that match, right? Especially if you say, gee, they're going to be here 4 years. And then there's a penalty, right? Oftentimes that we do signing bonuses and other things, and then they leave, they break that contract, and we're hesitant to, claw that back. And so we just sort of let it go. But, I think there has to be a little bit of teeth to it. But I think you're going to find hospitals and others would absolutely participate in that.
I'd just speak from the academic side, in representing the USG and Augusta University, the largest USG nursing program. But for our pre-licensure students, those who are traditional, so the younger students, if you will, in those programs, I think upfront a 4-year commitment might be a little much for them to be able, not knowing what their life holds in those 4 years or their plans. So other programs in the past in other states, other places I've worked, have looked at more of a 1 to 2 year incentive. It could go to 4 years, but you really look at that initial, and if they have a very positive experience that first year, they would be more likely to stay in that particular environment, and really approaching it at the time of enrollment to a program as opposed to at the time of graduation, so that they're committed, they have that financial stability, because we can never have enough scholarships and to support, attract, and retain our students, some of whom leave programs, at least temporarily, for financial reasons. And then come back to us. So it's also important to retain those students and keep them in the program and on track. And I think some of those financial incentives would really help in that regard.
And I do believe as well that we've talked about tax credits for those at the provider level, nurse practitioners, PAs to some extent, physicians. And I think that's really great, but I do believe that until we get the front line right, until we get staffing on the front line right, then you're not going to have feeder programs into faculty. I mean, that's where faculty comes from. So at the root cause is really getting that correct, whatever, at that front line or wherever that care is occurring, you know, on the front line of care. And I do think that's where the tax credits to keep people in the state, for those frontline people, those young nurses, and then ultimately it all works to improve the system overall. But I think that's where we have to start.
Go ahead, Dr. Sumner.
We had a lot of experience with scholarship in young people. And of course, these are post-college, so they're older. But they change over the 4 years. And so when we open up our two programs that are primarily rural, Nathan Bill and the Accelerate Track program that are committed to rural, we spend a lot of time educating them and saying, you don't want to do this, do not sign this line, because it is a punitive contract. You know, and it's, you sign up for the Army, you go to the Army. But we want you to want to do it. The other thing is, once we educate them, the whole time they're at Mercer, they become a club. They support each other. We expose them to people at the Bokeh one day. I'm picking on you. Who are doing good work in rural communities. We talk about business of medicine. And so you can't just have them sign it and say, see you in 4 years or see you in 2 years. It's got to be a lot of support, and they need to see places like this where you have the opportunity to give really good care in an environment that cares about a nurse, and other hospitals that care about nurses.
I was going to comment in regards to the 2 and the 4.
There, no.
Are you there?
Hello,
Hi, you can go ahead.
I'm sorry.
With your-
I was going to comment in terms of the 2 and the 4 year, bonus and interest. What we see, especially in some of the acute care spaces that staff are in, if we bonus them in the first 1 or 2 years, we really have not gotten any productivity from that team member. As orientation, especially in the specialty areas, oftentimes, takes up most of that time. So I can appreciate the 4 year recommendation rather than a 1 or 2. And then the other comment I had, I wanted to go back to a statement that Sherry made, which is on point, and that is, we're talking about, trying to get people to stay in our state, but we also already have our own sort of competing with each other. I would propose or just bring up the notion, someone mentioned data. In the current, there really is no way to verify data of compensation across the state. And because we get very creative in terms of that, we fill out the compensation surveys, but along the backside, we have things that we call, perimeter pay or those kinds of things. And so I would just ask us to be a little bit, put some guidelines in place that if we participate in state support, that we set up a database that is focused on compensation, that we have to be transparent. I think if we did that, we would sort of normalize our own competition. And so that would not become a factor as much as some of the other things.
Thank you. Mr. Bokeh, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I wanted to mention that I once again, forgive my ignorance, but is there a work study program around the state that does this kind of stuff? That can we not promote? I imagine it's the cost of education, right? Is a huge barrier that all individuals have to overcome. I'm old now, and my medical school cost was $3,600 a year at MCG back in the late 80s. So the cost, and I had to go to the Air Force to pay for all that. But is there anything that we could do along those lines, a pilot a program, something along those? I imagine if you had those people coming in doing the work stay, they would tend to stay and be able to for longer than a year or two or so. So I just wonder if that's an option to consider.
Sean, can I make a comment?
Absolutely, go ahead.
Sorry I couldn't be with you guys today, but I was just going to mention, I know that we're talking about recruitment of physicians and that kind of thing. But from what I'm seeing, most of it made it very difficult for me when I owned a private practice to recruit other healthcare providers because I couldn't compete with the healthcare systems. I've since sold my practice to Piedmont and I'm very happy, but I know that they offer in the younger people that we're trying to recruit into our group, the hospital systems are offering some loan forgiveness, if you will, that's repaid. You have to pay the tax on it, of course, but it's spread out over time. And I think that's probably a common thing. Maybe it wasn't there when I got out of medical school, but for instance, they'll spread that out over 6 years. And so you get that forgiveness, if you will, for some portion of your loans, but it's forgiven over a longer period of time. It's not 1 or 2 years where they pay your loans off. So I think we've already got some of that in place that doesn't require state dollars. But that's just a comment. The other thing, I know we're talking about retaining existing workers, and I'm was glad to hear Mary bring up competing within the state. We're giving a lot of attention to losing healthcare employees to other states surrounding us, but I can tell you in our area, in Northeast Georgia, it's a revolving door. And what we battle is retaining staff that really have even been working in the facilities for years, in nursing homes, hospitals, and everything. I'm hard pressed to walk onto a unit now and see a familiar face oftentimes because people are being recruited to other healthcare systems. But I brought this up before. I think our enemy is, and there's a place for it, is the staffing agencies who are unregulated and they're out of control. I did pull some information, and Sean, I've still got to connect with the group that's doing the survey, because when I was emailing back to them to try to get times, I never got a response. So I don't know if it's going to spam or what. But I have some information to share with you guys. I'll try to get to Sean with specific legislation. And I know there's going to be pushback about capping wages and that kind of thing, but 15 states right now have either enacted or have legislation passed waiting signatures by governor or proposed to regulate these staffing agencies. From registering with the Commissioner of Health and Human Services to all the way up to, I think, I pulled some of these up, but I think the Minnesota actually has a cap at 150% of the average wage. It also, most of these places are trying to ensure, I know my experience has been that these agencies are charging nursing homes overtime pay and hazard pay and all this on 1099 employees. And a lot of the states are enacting legislation that ensures that those agencies, that money has to go to the nurse or the aide, and they cannot retain those overtime fees. So, I think we've got to look at agencies and how we regulate how this is, because it's going to become, it is the norm. I mean, they're not going to go away. And right now they're out of control. there's no mechanism for really filing a complaint that I know of with the state of Georgia if an agency is out of line. There's no reporting system for nursing homes or hospitals to really look at how many shifts they're working these people and whether or not they've just worked a double shift and now they're handing them off to work to you. So there comes patient safety and everything. I just think it's a new realm. And whether we look at, a more aggressive stance like Illinois and Minnesota, I think there's a place for us to at least get the ball rolling on having our state look at how we manage agencies going forward. Because I'll see a nurse or an aide that's worked at a nursing home or a hospital for years, recruited away from the nursing home or hospital by an agency, and then that same nurse is staffing the same unit, but only working for the agency, and it's costing the facility, 200% of what they were paying for that same spot. So I don't know if anybody else is seeing that, but it's the day of having people with tenure and, people that you trust on units taking care of patients just seems to pass. So I think we have to address agencies in some shape or form if we're going to talk about retaining workers. Because they're just circling patients in and out of facilities.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Any additional comments, questions?
Just one thing, it was touched on a little bit when they talked about, I think Sean said nurses tend to eat their young. We did a thing with EMS several years ago, but we have found that sometimes just the environment they work in and what EMS tends to do, if you're a really good medic, you get promoted. And they don't get leadership skills with that and how you deal with conflict management, because in the healthcare, conflict management is between nurses, it's between nurses and supervisors, between nurses and patients, and EMS is the same way. We're just out on the streets with that conflict. So if there was something that they could do, and a hospital association might be a spearhead for this, we actually work with a public health college at Georgia Southern to develop what we do in the EMS world. And there's a whole week of conflict management and leadership as part of our leadership program. I just think that oftentimes we set them up to fail when we promote somebody to be a supervisor and don't train them in how to deal with people.
I just wanted to ask the question, we have this slide here that says working conditions are driving, what the conditions are driving the healthcare workforce to leave the industry in their position. And then we have on this other side, we're trying to do the retention bonuses and the student loan forgiveness and all those things. But if they are saying to us that these are the reasons that they are leaving, I know the state, like you said, at a state level can't control a lot of this. But, what do we do to really dive into the reasons? All the other stuff is extra, right? It's extra incentives, it's extra reasons for me to stay. But at the end of the day, when I go through my shift, whether I'm an EMS worker or aide or a nurse or a physician, and all these things still exist that I'm struggling with, does all that other stuff really impact what it is that I'm trying to do? So as this committee, and I think you said we would make some recommendations to the hospital association, because I guess is what you said as well from this. Is that what you said? There'll be some things that the state can control and then some things. I mean, I think we need to listen to what they're saying and dive into what the issues are. Let's not throw a lot of money at something that's not going to prove fruitful in the end and really get us the results that we're looking for, but create some tactics and some work around how can we address these things. It's more support at the bedside, and how do we get that? How do we encourage that? And how do we get there? I just want to make sure we're doing something that's going to prove fruitful and not just let's throw some more money at it. The competition is still going to be there, because if my working condition has these challenges, then I'm looking for the next one. I'm not going to continue to work in that same environment. Let me go and try something else. And then the competition ensues. It could be 50 cents more. It could be $1 more. It could be 30 cents more. But I think it's going to be a better practice environment than where I'm at today, I'm going to go for it. And that competition continues because, of course, the other organization needs it.
And yes,
Everything. Diplomatic way of saying yes.
The lowest ranking one is pay. And I'm sorry, I don't know the name of the last gentleman that was talking about agency. I've spoken with a lot of nurses that have gone to agencies, and typically it is not pay. It is having control and autonomy of your practice. If I have worked really hard and sacrificed my life for 3 or 4 or 5 years to get my nursing degree, I am not going to jeopardize my license because the facility is not providing safe staffing. Or if I'm required to work 4 12-hour shifts a week plus an on-call, or if I never get a holiday off or a Saturday off to spend with my family or get to go to my kid's birthday. Those are important things. And in today's society with our younger population, it is no longer, what are you going to pay me? It is also, what other things are you going to do? Am I going to get my own parking space? Am I going to have a flexible schedule? Can I telework? So I agree. I think the state, even though we can't regulate some of those things, I would like to see maybe the workforce board go in and do some additional, maybe we can fund them to do some additional research with the hospital association and other partners and come up with recommendations to the facilities, one of which is resiliency. You know, we teach resiliency that I have to own it. I have to do things to take care of myself. I have to take time, family, work-life balance. But we don't hold facilities accountable for having resiliency type policies that allow workforce to recover from traumatic events. And that's something I think we need to look at as well. So I agree with everything Jenny said.
Yeah, thank you.
If I could just respond to some of that. There isn't anything on here. I've been in healthcare for 30 years in hospitals. There isn't any. If number one is insufficient staffing levels, we have a shortage. We're 28,000 nurses short. We're short on respiratory therapists, on CNAs, on laboratory workers. It's not that there is a whole pool of people that we say, hey, we're just not going to hire you, right? We're trying to cut back. The challenge that we're dealing with is there's not enough staff in order to staff.
Yeah.
So, again, I think we can go in and offer suggestions, but these things have been studied. We're very well aware of them. The challenge, and there's a slide here that talks about childcare. I can tell you, new grads are interested in what they're. Let's talk about our 6% match in your retirement plan. No interest, right? And I get it. Maybe when I was 21 or 22, I didn't have, but when we talk about these benefits, let's talk about childcare. If they don't have a child, they don't care, right? I mean, so, and the thing is, right, there's just not one thing that fits all people, right? Everybody's going to have a different need. And there are thousands of those scenarios. And so, I just want to address that there's really no surprises in here. The emotional toll, the violence that nursing used to be sort of this held high in public setting. And now it's, they're just schlepping along. Patients spit on them, they bite them, they scream unbelievable things at them, choke them. We're all over it, right? Zero tolerance for that. And I would say every hospital has that same thing. We fire patients, hospitals, we can fire patients, and we do that. I wouldn't say frequently, but we do it enough. We say, you cannot come back here unless you're an emergency, right? We're required by law to do that. This is happening. And so again, I think those are always things we can do better and we can work on, but not necessarily probably something that this commission is going to be able to handle or do, nor, can the governor get his hands around how can we specifically help as a state? Sean, I hear you, and I think those are all really valid, that, insufficient staffing. Yeah, no kidding. That's not intentional. not intentional.
Thank you. Ms. Dalton, did you have a comment?
I did, and I apologize. I've been popping comments into the chat and I guess nobody can see them, so.
No, we're not monitoring the chat today. Sorry about
No,
that.
no, it's okay. I'm glad you're telling me that now, so I don't keep doing that. So I just wanted to say that I agree with a lot of the comments that are being made, especially what Sean is talking about, you know, and not to belabor what everybody else has said. I mean, the bonuses are great, but they are short-lived. You know, as soon as somebody gets their bonus, their retention bonus or the recruiting bonus, they're gone. And so they're nice to have, but they're not something that I think is going to help maintain and keep people on the job. So what I had popped in here is looking for, I think people are also looking for opportunities for further education, upward mobility, other things that they can work towards while they're on the job so that they stay at their job in hopes that they're teaching somebody behind them, kind of like in a succession planning. So if they're going to be thinking that they're going to be moving up and staying in that job, hopefully training somebody else behind them. And then the comment with the agencies, I know several states, as was mentioned, have tried to regulate that, but you know, it is unbelievable what they were charging. And yes, the nurses are certainly looking for a little bit more autonomy and more control of their schedule, as we witnessed with, they didn't want to work on the holidays, right? So, you know, and that's great, but there's got to be a way, and I'm sure statewide we could do one thing, but if we're going to be very strict with the agencies, they'll just work in other states. But I do think that we need to be able to at least say, well, if you're going to be working with an agency, you have to stay within the state. So if you're a Georgia nurse or physician even, and you're working with an agency, that you're staying within the state, you're not going to Texas or going to another state to work with that agency as well. And I had reached out to Senator Kirkpatrick actually quite a while ago about this. And I know that's a huge topic, but I do think we need to start talking to legislators about that and see how we can regulate the agencies in terms of how they're offering some workforce for us.
I have one more comment.
Sure, go ahead.
We had talked in prior conversations when we've been discussing the for-profit agency companies. One of the strategies would be to consider, and I think that there are some systems who have taken this on at a smaller scale. The staffing challenges are coupled with wanting flexibility. But also coupled with, it is a known fact that, you know, patient, you know, case mix, complexity, call scheduling requirements and the above have variation across hospital systems and hospitals all over our state. Again, if we're wanting to get to something tactical, one of the questions that I would ask is it an opportunity for the state to fund some demonstration projects by which we sort of cut out the middleman of the agency and create our own agency platform? So in other words, a health system in Atlanta could partner with a group of rural hospitals outside of Atlanta that would ultimately give staff an opportunity to get out of the, again, I have to be on call, we're doing cardiac, we're doing the above, but I'm going to work in an organization that still takes care of patients, high quality, high complexity, but it's a different level of shuffle. And then we start to partner better. So I would just throw that out as a notion of, if we're looking for how do we put our money to actually seeing those results? I think people would not then go to other agencies. There was a time at Wellstar, we had 800 agencies. And we developed our own internal agency program. One, some of the agency people that worked for the external came to our program. Two, some of them that left came back. And so there is some, you know, small examples that this kind of infrastructure would work, but I do believe that perhaps it's an opportunity to broaden it and to get some support from the state.
Scott, can I follow up on your comment a little bit? You know, nothing in here surprises you.
there's no silver bullet, but the crux of the issue in your mind is still, there's just not enough bodies to fill the jobs. Is there something in here or that's not in here that you feel like we should talk about further, or that we need to be highlighting a little bit more, or is there a role for this commission, a la the state, to play more directly trying to solve that specific problem? There's a lot of things on the periphery, there's all these other ideas and things we can talk about, but is there something from your perspective, Phoebe's perspective, that we really need to kind of dig in on a little bit?
Yeah, I think it really gets to the next section on C6, when we talk about increasing total seats and faculty availability.
So the pipeline.
Yeah, I mean, again, I've had folks say, hey, how can we help you? Can we give you some funds or stuff? And I'd say, no, give them to our academic partners, right? And give them to the school so they can be more competitive in faculty, that they can expand the number of seats, whether they need laboratory space or classroom space or faculty. And so to me, that's, when I read through this, that's where, at least from my opinion, we need to land. The other thing's absolutely important. But we're not going to be able to bonus our way out of this. We're not going to be able to childcare or, all those other things out of this when you need 100 and you have to, we're not restaurants where we've got a lot of restaurants. They just close down sections of the restaurants, or they just don't open a certain day, or, we have to stay open. And when patients come, right, where do you put them? And so what a lot of hospitals have done is they've closed units because they can't staff them, and patients stack up in the emergency room. So, it'd be great if we could sort of spread things out, not possible. And again, just putting more bodies into it isn't the only answer. This is complex. It's going to take a lot of these. It's a symphony, right? It's going to take a lot of these things to happen. But to me, when we get into C6 and talking about, what are the current standards? If we doubled the number of students, what would that take for all of our schools in Georgia to double the number of slots? So you might say, well, we don't have enough kids or folks that qualify. And I'd say, well, it's a 3.0. Well, what if we took it to a 2.9 or a 2.8 or a 2.7? I always think we're missing out on great nurses that maybe aren't great test takers. This last weekend, many academics in our many schools gave up their U.S. News World ranking for law school, Yale, Harvard, because what they said was it's their getting, in order to achieve the ranking that they desired, they had to take certain students, and usually great test takers, and it didn't meet their mission. And so I think of the same thing. I think, how many nurses have we missed out on? Great nurses, great bedside nurses that have a 2.9 GPA. And again, the criteria, I understand, I'm sure I'm gonna hear from it, that it's hard. The programming is hard. They have to have those bases. They have to get through biology and math. But that's where I'd say, then let me help with that. And we've done that right locally. We've said, we'll hire a biology instructor to help tutor maybe some kids, there's some students that are weaker. Again, that's not the only thing that we need to do there, but all those pieces of how do we get more kids through? How do we just create more nurses in order to fill some of these gaps, and then do these other things that are important across that profession.
It is multifactorial,
For sure.
of course, and but we have wait lists of students, so it's to that, to your point, certainly, but also there are wait lists. I know within many of the USG programs too, because it's faculty as well as clinical sites, and so just like we'll never have enough money to hire all the faculty we want per se, and there are just not that many out there, just like frontline nurses. So I think this is a great opportunity though for innovation and new partnerships between academic programs throughout the state and our health system partners in new ways of, we have all these students that need clinical site placements, but what are some innovative ways that we can engage those students on units? There are many exemplars of modified did education units and so forth. Looking to our State Board of Nursing and our national accrediting agencies for rather than students having all these different rotations with our new essentials and accreditation standards, we can begin to look at students maybe spending their entire program in one particular setting and some of those one-off specialties in other areas, and that lends to staff not having to, a new group all the time, but faculty where the nurses share in that faculty role in different ways. So I think all those things, I'd rather see some funds put into that kind of innovation that will address many of these other issues all at once.
I mean, Georgia should not have a wait list on a single nurse, right? I can imagine if they're waitlisted long enough, they go do something else, right?
So one of the, and I'm going to pause and breathe through this for just a second. Everything Scott said is absolutely correct. And the work that Phoebe is doing with their education partners, I wish could be emulated throughout the state without exclusion of schools, right? You don't want to have a facility, a hospital system partnering with a school and excluding other schools. One of the recommendations is to open more schools. We truly, I don't believe, need to open more schools, maybe make them more in like the rural areas availability. But if you're talking about building your pipeline, and I know we're looking at retention of workforce, there are rules that we can change within the Board of Nursing that would help with the capacity issues, right? Right now, there's a rule that states if you're a student in nursing school, you cannot work during your clinical hours and get paid for that. There are states that have a work to learn or a learn to work, whatever it is, so that you actually have to put a lot of monies into that. And that is something that a lot of the healthcare facilities are starting to look at now. And I think through the state help and support building those programs and helping the Board of Nursing to look at their regulation surrounding the schools, that would be helpful. For the school that I teach at, that I'm in charge of, our entry GPA is 2.75. We do not have a way. It doesn't even mean necessarily that they're poor test takers. How can we encourage that person who maybe did not get a good start in their life to come in and start nursing? I want to give one example really quick. I had a 19-year-old student who failed 2 nursing courses, which means she's dismissed from the program. She was appealing to get back in. When she explained her circumstances, I absolutely proved it. 19 years old, her dad is incarcerated. Her mom was a drug user, could not take care of the family. She was raising her 12-year-old brother and working 40+ hours a week in order to do that. She has no financial support. Absolutely accepted her back into the program because she needs this program just as much as we need her to be a nurse within the state. How can we assist those students to build that pipeline to help these folks in? Instead of opening up new programs, make it to where the Georgia system can accommodate more students in the programs that they have. It costs a lot of money to start up new programs. As far as clinical space, to learn type of environment would help. And then what do you do for those students that aren't successful in their program or don't get accepted in? One of the local state schools was talking about if they only accepted 30% of the qualified applicants. The other percentage that was not accepted into the program, they filtered into a health policy program. And then after they got their bachelor's in health policy, then they could apply to another program for accelerated nursing, but it wasn't even guaranteed they'd be in there. So after 6 years, this person may still not be a nurse. So if we created a repository for applicants to look at to see where seats are available at what schools within the system, within the state. Okay, if my first choice school doesn't have any seats available and I didn't get in, where can I apply? So that's something I believe the state can set up through the Board of Nursing as well. So now I'm not letting go of nurses and filtering them into another program. And then if a student is maybe unsuccessful or doesn't qualify for whatever reason, can we put them into fields and say, okay, look, if you go into this field for X number of years, then we will guarantee you a space in a nursing program and help provide you the resources to be successful. So now maybe they can do phlebotomy, rad tech, CNA, another space. And then after they fulfill that obligation, now they're guaranteed a space within a nursing program, which is where they want it to start. So now I'm helping fill a smaller pipeline here with a long-term pipeline over in the space where we need it. Sorry, a little passionate about it.
No, that's great. That's great. Any additional feedback?
Hey, Sean, have we talked about, we haven't talked about, we're talking about pipeline. Sorry, let me, we talked about pipeline for nurses, and it just seems like one of our untapped resources. And I know we have these around the state, or these college career academies. I know we're using those, but if it were a stepping stone where if you identify these kids who are interested in healthcare and we get them into that pathway, if you will, early on in high school, and get them to be a certified nurse's aide and get them working part-time in facilities. Meanwhile, if there's the right partnership, it would seem, between the technical colleges, the nursing schools, and the college career academies, we could get a lot of these kids out of high school as LPNs, even potentially, or almost certified. It just seems like if we got more focus on that, and I think the state's already funding that stuff, right? It's just a matter of, I guess, faculty and partnering up the career academies with the nursing schools, technical colleges, and getting the resources to do it. But they already have the labs in most of those places. They already have the classroom space, and it just seemed like that'd be an easier path to get that to happen.
There's a lot of opportunity there that already exists. And the state's invested a lot in particularly in allied health professions for high school students. And so I think we just have to think through what any recommendations around that looks like, and need y'all to shift
I just keep
my lens a little bit, but
faculty.
But what is it that the state does other than encourage partnership at the local level? I mean, the opportunity and the funding for those students to go through those programs is there. They can essentially graduate high school with a high school diploma and some sort of credential at the same time. That opportunity exists. And I don't know if it's a lack of awareness or lack of local, I don't know what it is that we need to highlight to make those kind of arrangements more popular. But the opportunity and the structure for that to happen is already there.
Well, I just keep hearing, I guess, the people that are on that side of the profession from the education standpoint keep talking about faculty. I don't know. I wonder if part of the issue is that the programs don't have enough full-time faculty within the school systems or the partnerships or whatever, to be able to have someone there. It just seems like that seems to be a common thing I'm hearing today, is the pipeline is kind of bottlenecked because we don't have enough faculty. It just seems like that's where we need to invest a lot of money and resources into getting the faculty in place to get these people educated.
Just as there's a shortage in bedside staff, there's also a shortage in nursing faculty. So, and I'm gonna absolutely put Scott on in the spotlight here. Phoebe, again, in this space does great work. Northside Hospital right now, hospital system is working with schools. I believe Mercer is one of them, Chamberlain is one of them. And they're helping to provide bedside nurses to be clinical faculty and are taking on some of that financial burden and allowing nurses to, you know, work 2 normal shifts, taking care of patients, and then 1 shift taking care of students who are taking care of patients. That those types of incentives, if the state can help fund getting those started, or helping the planning and building through example, I think that is a space where the state can be helpful. And again, the Board of Nursing can work with this as well.
Say that again, Sean, specifically.
In reference to
What you would want this commission to recommend the state to do?
to help to finance the startup or provide guidelines for a startup of such of a program where the Board of Nursing can work with facilities to allow a clinical nurse to help with schools. Right now, our Board of Nursing rules state that a preceptor can only take 2 students at a time. There's nothing in the board rules that advocates for or gives specific guidelines for a staff nurse to take a clinical group of 6 or 8 students. So in a traditional nursing group or nursing rotation, you have 1 instructor, 6 to 8 students, or in some cases 10 students. The board allows 10 students. That nursing faculty follows those students. In a precepted experience, it is a staff nurse one-on-one with a student, giving them an immersion into that unit. Well, if I have a staff nurse, there's nothing in the board rules that accommodates or allows for them to specifically take a group of students. If a hospital is going to pay for a staff nurse to take a group of students in partnership with the school to ensure that we're meeting our learning outcomes and objectives, the Board of Nursing can write that into their rules to where that's allowed. Right now, I believe our state institutions are allowed to have an affiliation faculty partnership, but there's not a lot of guidelines behind that. So I do think that's an area where the Board of Nursing, from the governor's recommendation, to work further with that.
Is it specifically prohibited or just not explicitly?
It's not addressed. It's not prohibited. It's just not, there's nothing in the rules to say you can or can't.
And does the provider community take the absence of guidance as guidance?
Yeah. And you might know more about the affiliation.
Yes, so, it has to do with the level of preparation of the individual staff nurse that we would be looking at that in addition to the Board of Nursing, which would be at the state level, of course, but there's also national accreditation of nursing programs that would impact that as well. So kind of again, that multi-pronged approach to that. But other models of those dedicated education units, not former models, but newer models and ones that I'm familiar with in another state, certainly provide that opportunity that's being articulated here or discussed here. And I think those are opportunities for us to look at how we can do that and expand the reach of our faculty in those regards. And that would fall within current Board of Nursing regulations.
Could you expand on what that means? What is a dedicated education unit? That's kind of interesting. What is that? Does it have, I hear about faculty. The question I was going to ask earlier was, what are the criteria to be called faculty? Because I've always thought you learn from everybody in the hospital. But to be a faculty, I understand with medicine, we have to have a responsible partner who oversees the people they're rotating with. But nursing has to have a designated criteria for faculty. Is that what it is? And I get the 1 in 10, but what is the faculty? Describe what qualifies as faculty.
Correct. So, and from our accreditation is that they either have a graduate degree in nursing or working towards that. In other words, you can have a baccalaureate student with their sole faculty being someone with an associate degree or exclusively a bachelor's degree. And so that requires that higher level of education.
So you have to have a master's.
To do that.
But isn't there classroom faculty and clinical faculty, which are different requirements that-
Correct. So masters and or doctorally prepared.
for the classroom?
faculty.
On the front line of clinical experience, it is RN, correct?
Working toward
Yeah.
a graduate degree.
It also depends on your accreditation. Yeah, it depends on your accreditation as well. So the Board of Nursing requires a BSN minimum with 2 years of experience in the area. So if I'm teaching mother baby, I can't be a mental health nurse only. I have to have mother baby experience, right? That makes sense. So they have to have at least a BSN. For clinical or didactic. However, school accrediting bodies require master's prepared nurses or a certain percentage, depending on your accrediting body, to be master's prepared or higher. They're really asking for doctor prepared. So depending on what accreditation you have, the Board of Nursing allows BSN. So the Board of Nursing state of Georgia is covered. It's if you're CCNE or. Yep.
I believe the conversation we're having about, it sounds like a really actually a hybrid of the old DEUs of the past. But I, from a hospital side of operations, I think it would be absolutely embraced. And someone who asked a question in terms of what does it look like in the clinical setting, in the current, we assign students all over the hospital into multiple units. In the DEU of the past, you could expect that is a dedicated space. You could expect that there are a lot of students there. You could expect that there would be some level of template of how we interface the clinical nurses with the faculty who's on site. And it also, which is a little bit different, would extend into the weekends and nights, and it really starts to feel like that they work here, which I love the conversation. I cannot hear if someone's talking.
Organization that we gotta give the folks here in academics that some flexibility to do what we're asking them to do. We certainly still want
Versus part-time. So in our annual report that we have to provide to the nursing, we are required to have a 1:25 faculty to student ratio. But we cannot count our part-time faculty. I believe that is also an area of opportunity that we can look at within the Board of Nursing. So if I have, let's say, 60 part-time faculty or what we call adjunct or visiting professors, and the majority of my faculty that are teaching didactic in the classroom are full-time, there should be some stipulation or parameters in which I can count an adjunct part-time or visiting professor, whichever terminology the school uses, within our Board of Nursing 1:25 ratio. I think that would also help with our faculty shortage. There is research, and the Board of Nursing put this out. It was part of the information that was provided to the committee in our last meeting that stated part-time faculty or adjunct faculty are not as impactful to the education because they're not as invested. But some of us have visiting or adjunct that work with us every single session. They just don't want to work full-time in education. They don't want to step away from the bedside. why can't we account them in our 1:25 ratio that is set by the Board of Nursing? The board did just change that recently from 1:20 to 1:25, and that was very helpful, but I would like to see E addressed there as well from our board. That is something that we can address.
And I think that would help. I think that would help hospitals and nursing homes and others retain a lot of their leaders who, want to go teach, right? They want to go teach. They want to give back, but Sean's point, they don't necessarily want to do it full time. So to me, that's also a way to retain and incentivize some of our more senior nursing leaders.
It's also a disincentive to move from a clinical position to a faculty position financially. Disincentive, there are trade-offs, so I think we have to keep that in, that in mind too. And to the new kind of DEU model. So was in Texas prior to coming here. And so I know Texas is mentioned here as well as a state that retains more of their nurses, but so in Texas for the state schools, it's the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. And there are some models there of which through that, that these innovative models have been funded, and the DEU development model that I was part of was funded through that system. And so I think we can look at many other states as well have this, not to say we don't have great examples in Georgia as well, but as we're looking for these opportunities to further expand these initiatives and what is the best ROI for limited pool of funds, to look to some of those opportunities.
Sorry, one more thing in reference to Board of Nursing. Right now, we have one part-time educator. We have one part-time education consultant, and she's responsible for, I can't remember, it was 83 or 85 nursing schools, and reading their annual reports and answering questions and managing our NCLEX pest information, and it's a lot. So I would also like to propose that the Board of Nursing gets some additional funding in order to bring on a full-time nurse education consultant so they can help to develop some of these initiatives and to help really look at how they can support the schools in some of these partnerships. They can also use that funding to help with fielding phone calls. Specifically somebody who is assigned directly to the board. Right now, when you call, it is a answering service for all boards. And the Board of Nursing, I don't know if we are the largest board, but it's one of the bigger ones within the state. And that would be helpful for students and people filtering calls as well. So I would like to make those two proposals, please.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for that. Very informative feedback. It seems as if we've touched on each one of the opportunity levers, but I will just very briefly go back to allow you guys to make any other comments that you haven't made. We've gone through the increased total seats and faculty availability, as well as targeted a larger pool of candidate students. But if you would like me to stop anywhere to have any additional conversation, this is A1, retain existing workers. I think we've gone through that.
I just have one more comment
Sure.
with regard to retention and circling back to workplace violence. I noticed the suggestion was to require employers to provide training on workplace violence. And that is something that we do extensively in the psychiatric realm. And we have trainings throughout the year and large extensive trainings twice a year. But it is still a significant issue with retaining our employees, and workplace violence or aggression is something that can happen on an almost daily basis in our settings because we have just the quantity of the individuals with that propensity in our settings. And I think we need to look at something in addition to that for psych and some of these like emergency departments, which tend to see this type of individual with more frequency. And I've made some specific suggestions related to that. But I think it's important that those areas that are at higher risk, we have more than just the training on how to respond, because it's not currently sufficient, and we're losing a lot of healthcare workers because of it. And we know we need our psych units open to get those patients out of your hospitals.
Sean, I just wanted to, we've talked mostly about nursing and physicians. And we're still trying to get some good data on where the EMS programs are taught. The technical colleges in the years past did the lion's share of that work. They are not doing that today. They have I think, a very small percentage of the training that's going on in state. We're finding ourselves, and I think that's what Mr. Kionis is going to be about how much money he spends every year training his own people. They have their own. They actually now have got to the point where they hire them. They bring them in, sit in the class, and they are trained on the clock. Extraordinarily expensive. In a lot of the smaller communities in Georgia, Emmanuel's one of those that now hired a full-time person to do EMS education. And we're training our own because it's very difficult to get into the technical school systems. And generally, if you look at Region 6, which Manual County is the bottom of, it's the health district, Region 6. There's not a technical college program in Region 6 that has a student under a desk in the EMS program at all. So there's huge deserts out there for EMS training. And it's not just impacting EMS. I've spent a good bit of time in the last couple of weeks with rural hospitals who are having huge problems getting emergent transportation for patients who desperately need care out of their rural facilities to another tertiary center. And some of the stories are quite heartrending. So EMS has got a little different perspective than the general discussion.
Wait, well taken. And Mr. Kionis, are you on the line? Would you like to share your data now?
60, 60, 60, 60, 60, 60, 60, 60, 60, 60, 60, 60, 60, 60, 60, 60, 60, 60, 60, 60, 60, 60, 60.
Wow. All right.
Apparently not.
Okay.
Sean, he did text me and say he was going to send you the PowerPoint. And his comments say you could share it with the group.
Okay, will do. That sounds great.
Courtney, and you may know this and I don't, but I've heard a discussion or two about a system down in Southwest Georgia that they do train EMS in high school. I mean, they aren't qualified to that, but they start and they get to go, they get exposure and they call them the raters, and then they're qualified to set their first exam.
Yes.
Who is that?
Well, there's several programs in Georgia doing that in different rural regions. It's the dual enrollment. What most of them are doing is a dual enrollment program of the technical college, so that the student can and it doesn't impact their Hope grant, which is a great thing. So they can take that in a high school setting and get out of the high school and actually stand for their EMT boards at that point, and then walk out with a job, and then still with their Hope scholarship, Hope grant, depending on where they want to go from there. The difficulty has been for a lot of the rural communities in finding faculty to do that, because under current rules, you have to meet certain requirements to teach an EMT class, and it's a little difficult. That, in my opinion, the State Office of EMS is actively trying to decrease the number of EMS educators out there. Their thought is that the pass rates are bad, so they may disagree with the way I perceive it, but their thought is that if the pass rate's bad, it must be because you got a bad instructor. Let's get rid of some of the instructors, and then the cream will rise to the crop or to the top. But my problem with that is that in doing that, it destroys the pipeline. So if tomorrow the gentleman who works for us and does training quits, leaves, he's in a nursing program, by the way. So yeah, he's working his way to help you guys. And I personally think that's a great plan, but if he left, they would have a hard time finding another qualified instructor. So what a lot of the schools are doing is they're partnering with the local EMS to provide the EMS educator that goes into the classroom to teach. So to a certain extent, if we're going to do that anyway, I'm not sure what the technical school brings to the table, so to speak. So I think those partnerships are there.
Okay,
So Courtney, I have a question too. Certainly you need more EMS personnel. I've got several of her patients of mine, but I think a bigger concern for me is the inappropriate and abuse of the EMS system, right? I just yesterday had the EMS said that the patient wanted to go through the drive-through on the way to the hospital. And these stories are just on and on, as you well know. So is there a way that, because if they're out doing those kind of runs, they're not there to get the true emergencies that need to go to the hospital. Is there a way that we could somehow propose what we could do with that? Because I just find it just unbelievable.
And there is some, if you go back and read the initial 1966 paper that set up EMS, more or less, it's a highway safety thing. It wasn't healthcare. It was people dying on the side of the road. But even back in 66, they said they needed a screening mechanism to make sure that the appropriate resources took care of the appropriate patient. In many areas of the state of Georgia, the 911 system has what they call an EMD, emergency medical dispatch, so that they can talk to the patient. And if it's an emergent, then obviously it's a Category 1 patient. If it's the guy who's not, well, yeah, he needs an ambulance, but not the next half hour. But and the other thing is, well, you know, I've had calls, 911 has called me and said, hey, we got somebody who's calling from the emergency department, waiting room in the ER, wants you to send an ambulance to pick them up and take them to the ambulance because they're tired of waiting. So that does happen.
great. Thank you for that discussion, guys. Any other comments on C6, increasing the total seats and faculty availability? Okay. D10, target a larger pool of future students with outreach and incentive programs. Any additional comment?
Yes, I do. I think this is wonderful. I think in my neck of the woods outside Statesboro, my kids went to school and were dual enrolled right at Georgia Southern University while they were still in high school. I think it's a wonderful thing. It was free. It didn't cost me anything for my. And therefore teach some of these juniors and seniors in high schools, things like respiratory therapists, CNA, while they're there with the use of technical schools, perhaps, and get them not worried about going to college. We're going to go get a job and we're going to be a respiratory therapist or something along those lines. So I'd love to see where we could do that in the public school system, to perhaps do that and take those kids that, once again, they have no idea, no plan to go to college, take them out of that college prep kind of thing and put them in a technical pathway.
Or stack the LPN.
Yeah.
And prep.
Right.
And curriculum, ready to take your boards when you turn 18.
Yeah.
But then get a job that pays $25, $35 an hour,
Right.
and then go to get your next degree in
Right,
nursing.
right.
And
Exactly.
and I think you've got to do that.
Yeah.
You've got, because otherwise they don't have, they're working at Walmart as greeters.
Mhm.
And they're bright kids, you know, they want to do something.
So Sean, I got a text from somebody that's listening online and they pointed out in some hospitals they're doing it as a career academy, not associated with the technical college. So there's two different pathways. But his point was that the career academies are having a terrible time getting their students into the clinical sites because of insurance capabilities. So the hospitals want them to have some kind of liability insurance or something going on. So I don't know how that's cost prohibitive or age. And we might look into that.
Well, and I know I've talked about this, but career academies, I think there's 31 across the state right now that facilitate those programs, along with all the technical colleges. But dual enrollment is also available to kids going to any of the Hope eligible private institutions, as well as all the university system of Georgia institutions. So
it may be that we need to pick a couple of those programs that we feel like are robust and successful and just highlight how that came to be. Because most of the time that was not top down from the state, it was bottom up, a local initiative or with that career academy. So that brings up a point as well, the, hope availability. I would like to see if there's a way where we can look at the qualifying schools for that. Again, to use my school as an example, we're the second largest producer of nurses within the state, Emory being number one, and I don't qualify for Hope. And that's something we've been trying to get through legislation for a couple of years. And for various different reasons, it hasn't been able to get through, not because anybody is opposed to it, but because extra language was added in that, of course, nobody would vote for. But that is something that I think would be helpful, because as we're trying to get that pipeline in, we want to make sure that, that it is affordable for students to be able to go to all schools that are available within the state that are of quality. That may be something you and I can talk about offline too, Sean. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yep.
The one piece in here with D10 is, as we think about hopefully we're going to talk about our data sometime today, or, really having good data on a regular basis. So we're not guessing, and, we can really talk to constituents about it using real data, but it would be wait lists, right, within the state, for the program. I don't really have a perspective of what the wait lists are. I hear that oftentimes there are open slots and they just don't have enough qualified applicants, and then other times, they've waitlisted hundreds. I think that would ultimately be helpful, and I think it'd be helpful for hospitals and other health institutions to be able to go say, hey, how come you've got 100 wait list? What's the challenge? And if it's faculty or if it's clinical space or other things, I think, you'd find willing partners in that to assist. The other question I have, and we don't have any, I think, one from the technical college system here on the commission, but is like everyone, you've got things that make your organization money and things that you lose on, and the technical colleges are no different. And when you talk about what careers that they provide training for, nursing's almost at the top of the list of what they lose money. So when I go in and say, hey, would you mind expanding 100? And as we did, we need you to expand 200 nursing slots at the technical college. And they lose money on every one of those. They have to somehow figure out, maybe it's cosmetology or some of the other that they make money on to balance. They got to have a zero budget balance, and that can oftentimes be a challenge. I'm not an expert in funding and university system or the technical colleges and the Hope grant, and how much tuition pays for it, how much the state is subsidizing it. Those are all it's way above my pay grade. But I know that I get those looks, right? And as we're just saying, well, heck, we're so desperate, we'll help figure this out. That's not a long-term, it's not a long-term strategy. So I think having a better understanding, I know for me, how that runs from a technical college standpoint, or at a private college or university, or at the state would be helpful to, thinking about potential solutions, options.
I have one last comment, Commissioner.
Sure, go ahead.
We've talked a lot about work burden, and we've talked about, and I know we're focusing on nursing and direct patient care. When we initially started having this conversation, we talked about, as a state, we would have to see how we change the model of care. So I'm really thinking, if we recruited more nurses and we recruited more respiratory therapists, for an example, but someone just gave the example, part of the work burden and the work environment that nurses are not happy with is that all the other positions that they used to be able to have to help them practice at the top of their license. Because those individuals are getting sold by Walmart because they don't want the risk, so their minimum wage matches the hospitals and the other healthcare entities' minimum wage. So I wonder if, again, there's an opportunity to make some exception in terms of minimum wage for healthcare providers that are non-clinical, but are important to the nursing infrastructure. Because I lose my care partners, I lose my sitters who are safety, help with my safety. They go to McDonald's, they go to, the Atlanta Braves Stadium, for an example. So I don't want to send us down a rabbit hole, but I feel like that's sort of a category that I haven't heard us mention of any opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Any follow-up comment, questions? Anything else on D10?
Just a question, slide 20, right, that shows, again, we're using North Carolina and as a comparison, and maybe that's fair, maybe it's not. But if Georgia was at their retention rate, we'd have 54, I assume that's saying we'd have 5,400 additional folks in the state.
Per year.
And, that's 20% of our problem today, right? I mean, that would solve, not solve at all, but significant. I don't quite understand in it. So what is exactly did they do? What did they do to be successful? What were their strategies to be successful? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very great question. And we can, I believe we pulled some of the data, some of our example initiatives from those states.
Okay.
So as you go through those, you'll see, an example of what they did to get to that rate.
Maybe is there a way to identify those initiatives that they are from North Carolina to see? I mean, two slides here, we say we're comparing to North Carolina. We don't know what, I'm just.
Absolutely.
It's a
We can get
copycat league, right?
right. We can get that to you. All right. Well, we are at our break time. I see lunch is being set out for us now. So if you want to take a break and then come back and have lunch, and then we'll reconvene at 12:30. Thank you. Significant impact as well. Mike, can you guys a clicker? Thank you. So these opportunity levers, these 5 are to ensure students have access to required clinical, practical experience/training, better recognize education and work experience, freeing formal educational capacity, increase retention and completion rates, innovate and advance workforce composition and care delivery models, and achieve top of license delivery within scope of practice limits. So for each of these opportunity levers, the following pages will give some additional context and an objective fact base, as well as some example initiatives. All right. So regardless of whether the focus is on professions requiring degrees or those involving certifications, employers are seeking more workers with both educational requirements, And these are quotes from you all. One of the most challenging components of increasing capacity is finding access to clinical space. We have trouble recruiting for nursing faculty, DNP and PhD prepared. So let's talk a little bit about some example initiatives to ensure students have access to required clinical practical experience and training. The first initiative would be to explore opportunities to increase capacity for students, learners within care settings, training programs. And B would be explore funding options for the development of clinical training facilities. So I will pause here. Any feedback, comment on this?
Further explanation of the example, the second example where it says, if Georgia could be allocated funds to universities that expand their clinical training, faculty and facilities. Can we get better explanation of that, or?
Do we have an explanation on that, guys? Anything in addition to what we have here? And these are just examples, you know, that have had, that they've seen out, that we've seen out there.
There may not be a lot more, Sean. Some of this is just what we heard from us collectively. So, I mean, I think that's something we can talk about what that would look like if or if there's interest there.
I think this Mayor Chapman, I think this slide ties into our conversation about the EUs earlier.
Okay.
So I really, I like these two additional detail items, examples. Again, I don't claim to know anything about how the state educational system allocates resources for degrees, right? I don't know how many, there are hundreds of degrees, I'm sure. And is there any preference to degrees in the state from a funding perspective based on the need for that degree in the workforce? Or if you were a dance major or a nursing major or an engineer, is sort of that resource allocation all the same across the board, no matter what degree there is. So.
There's a comment in there about clinical training facilities. I guess I would ask anyone that has perspective on that. Is there a shortage of physical location for clinical?
If you have, to give again a personal example. So Children's is tasked with trying to place hundreds of students every semester at various institutions. And there is a limited capacity. They can only allow so many clinical rotations per school. And they're very equitable about it. They do a great job with it, but they're limited. So if you're in a location where you need 60 placements or 50 placements, but they can only give you 20, what do you do with those other students that need a similar rotation? So I believe that this is talking about that. So you can increase your capacity of seats, desk seats. But if you do not have a place to send them to clinical, then you're limited as to how you can get them through your program because they are required to have clinical experience. the other side to that is there is currently no regulation for BSN programs as to how many clinical hours you have to have for the State Board of Nursing. Each institution sets their own. There's no standardization. There is for LPN.
Tanya, did you want to speak from your perspective at Augusta in terms of clinical space? Do y'all have challenges with that?
Yes, I think, across the state, various programs, that was one exemplar of PEDS, but I think really in all clinical areas that is a limiting factor. But again, this provides us with that kind of innovation, DEUs is one example that I shared earlier, but there are many other models for that and how we can use some of our other, we've talked about acute care partners, but some of our primary care partners and other types of community learning experiences for our students, and just really being innovative with what meets the learning objectives and outcomes in that. So I think that looking at funding opportunities for those innovative programs and building on evidence that have been used in other states to do that.
I know for medical schools, we put a lot of emphasis on, I think all of us do, in protecting the learning environment, because if you overcrowd it, the student gets a bad experience and it slows down the ability of the practitioner to do their job as well. So, the one thing that might come in, I don't want to say anything if it hurts your crew, but I think there are a lot of out-of-state learners that come into Georgia for clinical experiences. And if they focused on in-state institutions primarily, or incentivize hospitals to use in-state institutions and their students, it would be helpful.
I'd like to speak to that from the APRN or advanced practice nurse perspective, primarily both our CRNA or nurse anesthesia students at the DNP level, as well as all of our other clinical track concentrations at the doctoral level, that is something that we face with capacity. We know within those specialties, behavioral mental health care professionals, we have a DNP psych nursing, mental health nursing program, and we're very constrained by the opportunities for our students. And what we're finding is that some institutions out of state and others are paying preceptors at the graduate level, and as part of the system, that's not something that we can do, is charge our students for clinical placements in addition to the tuition and fees they're already placing. So when we look at our university system, colleges and schools, we're being kind of wedged to a point where we can't have some of those graduate level APRN experiences for our students because of that. And I think that is something we could truly look at, just like we've talked about kind of agency nursing and how that, financial model really disincentivizes or prohibits some other opportunities. So
is it possible to look at, I guess, reaching out through the Georgia Healthcare Association to see if we can connect with the skilled nursing facilities around the state? I think there's a huge opportunity for clinical sites, particularly for LPN students there. I mean, the post-acute care setting has a good opportunity to provide a great education. I don't know how we hook that up, but and how we facilitate it, but there's an RN in the building all the time, and during the day at least, and I think a lot of opportunity there if we're short on clinical sites.
We do utilize a lot of nursing skilled facilities. A lot of schools do, especially the technical schools for LPN programs, but they also try to get them into hospital-based clinical as well for the LPNs to get that experience. I think one opportunity that we might have again, working with the Board of Nursing, is maybe establish again a database of institutions, healthcare providers, doctors' offices, whoever might be interested in taking in a student. Because a lot of times the schools are having to basically Google research and try to find facilities that might be interested. Whereas there are times when healthcare providers might reach out to schools to say, hey, I would love to have students. It would be nice if there was a repository somewhere where they could go in and put in their information. And again, that might be something we could do through the Board of Nursing.
All right, great discussion. Any additional feedback on C7? All right, opportunity lever, C8, better recognize education and work experience, freeing formal educational capacity. Some example initiatives are implement reskilling and upskilling programs to meet future demand, reevaluate change criteria or expand programs to allow more mid-career professionals to access state scholarship programs for regular upskilling, and work with state regulatory boards to use previous experience to waive preliminary education requirements when pursuing LVN to RN, RN to BSN, and counselor to social worker degree pathways. I'll pause here. Invite any discussion on C8.
This is Mary. I hope for under C that we could include the regulatory board conversation in regards to APPs. I think that fits under this category. I think Georgia has a not a perfect supply, but a higher supply of APPs than some other states, and some of the current regulations make it more difficult to be very flexible with what they do. And I know that we've had conversations related to that. This was driven by the national board. Now the state board is taking that up via the consensus model, but I wonder if we ought to just include that under that bullet.
Does anyone have any objections to including that?
I just agree with Mary.
Great, that's noted. Thank you very much.
I do think this is a good area of opportunity for us to expand out. We do have multiple entry points for nurses. Right now, we've seen a lot of facilities going back to hiring LPNs for team type care nursing. So I think it would be nice if we were able to have, if we were going to increase any programs within the state, I think a bridge program, LPN to RN bridges, we don't have a lot of those within the state. That is definitely an area of opportunity. Help encourage those LPNs to go further in school. They tend to be really strong at the end of their programs too, because they really understand skill and care when you start as your LPN and work your way up.
That's great. Any other feedback on that?
Was military included in this, Foreman?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Moving on to B11, increase retention and completion rates. Okay, and a few of the example initiatives are offer targeted financial hardship grants to reduce dropouts for students in final year, connect Georgian employers and upcoming graduates to educate and promote employment opportunities, and lastly, promote industry education partnerships that offer guaranteed hire/placement for graduating students.
So my understanding on this one, we're looking at increasing retention and completion rates of a program, correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So I guess for me, B and C are more get them jobs after completion
Mhm.
versus helping them to complete. Unless they're modified a little bit to where it is again a work to learn program, where if they actually came in earlier in their programs,
Mhm.
meet the students, advocate their facility, offer to have them come in and work as a CNA, PCT, whatever title we would like to give them, and then allow them to earn money and clinical hours while they're enrolled. One of the biggest reasons that students are unsuccessful is because they have lack of work-school balance, and they have to work full-time jobs. Nursing, no matter where you go, is challenging. The school is challenging. There's so much that they have to learn. And if you cannot put energy and time and effort into it because you're working a job, you are not going to be as successful as you could. We've looked at the data and statistics of students that are unsuccessful, specifically in my program. And it doesn't matter what their entry GPA was. It doesn't matter what their admission test score was. The students that are unsuccessful, the common denominator is that they were working 20 to 40 hours a week plus. So if there is a way to, I think A is fantastic. And then going back to a previous statement about work to learn.
So any feedback on that proposed revision there? So Dr. Little, are you saying that you prefer to focus these on pre-graduation versus after graduation? Any input from the commission members on that? And do we need to build any post-graduation support at all?
I think post-graduation goes to the prior retention of workforce.
Okay.
That's where you're going to look at your onboarding, your residency programs, your support for your new grads, because a lot of them are coming out of school. From what I hear from our partners, no matter where they go to school, there's a challenge to learning how to practice that first year.
I agree that getting them involved as a student nurse, PCA or PCT, while they're in school really helps with retention of them. They get to learn the organization, they get to learn the culture, they get to learn the people that they're working with. Helps to retain them more, but as she said, they struggle with being able to work while being in school. It's just hard for them to do that. And most of them are PRN and can pick up hours here and there. But if there was an opportunity to create that work study program with the clinical hours and while they can do both, I do think that that would be beneficial.
Okay.
It is very helpful for them to come on while they're still in school. Great.
Good, robust program. I can provide that to the committee. I did provide it to the Board of Nursing, but changing the rule that the board states they can't earn money while in clinical.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm hearing that we are in agreement that we can make changes to those initiatives for pre-graduation versus the post-graduation component. All right. My clicker.
And I'm sorry, Sean, if I may add one more.
Sure.
I'm so sorry. I feel like I'm.
Right.
So Georgia Power used to have a program that someone could co-op with them. They'd work for Georgia Power for 6 months, and then they would go to school 6 months, and then they would swap back and forth. Is there any such program like that? Somebody could go to school a semester, work a semester, go to school a semester. Is that doable?
Doesn't DOT do that?
DOT. She said it's DOT. That's
Yeah,
DOT. do
but something like that, PCPs and CNAs, but it's in partnership with the technical college, and so they work 4 days a week, and they go to school 1 day a week, and at some point it shifts, and they go to school 3 days a week and work 2 days a week.
All right. Moving on to opportunity lever D11, increase retention and completion rates. Some sample initiatives include offer targeted financial hardship grants to reduce dropouts for students in final year. Connect Georgian. Yeah, we did this one. See, I sit down and then I lose my place. Okay. So on this slide, we're moving into additional opportunity levers. Healthcare providers could consider how to adjust scopes of practice and simultaneously encourage top of license care. 83, and I'm not going to read all of this. You guys can take a look at that, but we did want to share some of the potential opportunities here that we obtained through interviews with you all. Share best practices for working with allied workforce. Identify and address high burden, low impact documentation requirements. Leverage micro credentials to increase providers' ability to accomplish high demand tasks. Review existing scope of practice regulations in the state to ensure appropriate and to ensure they are appropriate and evidence-based. Develop and share materials that define top of license care delivery and improvement standards. Yeah. Does this surprise anybody here? This slide, the percentages, I believe everybody is aware of that. So when we're looking at the opportunity lever E13, innovate and advance workforce composition and care models. Right. Some sample initiatives include promote best practices for teaming with allied workforce members and how to best distribute administrative tasks across team members. Assess opportunity to streamline documentation and other regulatory requirements of practices. Facilitate increased micro-credentialing opportunities for high demand or routine tasks to promote top of license care across healthcare organizations. Any feedback on that, comments or questions? Okay. All right, moving to E14, achieve top of license delivery within appropriate scope of practice limits. Some sample initiatives include establish a recurring review or in-depth study of existing scope of practice regulations to ensure they are appropriate, research-based, and supportive of industry best practices. And develop materials defining top of license care delivery and improvement playbooks to share with providers to encourage best practice adoption. Any
I'd like
questions?
to
Sure, please, Sonia.
provide further emphasis on that. I think as we look at some of our neighboring states to which we lose some of our advanced practice registered nurses, both our CRNAs and other APRN specialties that have a broader scope of practice, that this would be a good opportunity for the state of Georgia to really take an in-depth look at that and how those APRNs can better meet rural areas and other needs where there is a lack, where there are lack of providers. So.
Okay.
But I'm seeing this too, as well, to assist with the RN. For example, the years ago, we used to have med techs that could assist with that role and take that off of the nurse so she can perform other top of duty license.
So when we say med tech, we're referencing from nursing skilled facilities, correct? Or are we saying across the board?
Yeah, I'm saying across the board.
Okay. So when we're looking at care model, right now, I do think we have an ability to, LPNs are very qualified to do this. And there have been a historical team approach to nursing where you have an RN team leader, LPN administering meds, and CNA helping with ADLs. And the RN was, could take up to like 10 or 14 patients depending on the unit. And then the LPN would have 7 or whatever that looked like. And those were effective. I think the challenge with that is when you start looking at like magnet status and different accrediting bodies and different recognitions, they want BSN or higher prepared.
That really is a fallacy. Being an expert on the magnet designations and leading each one, that really is a fallacy. What Magnet wants is they want the clinical outcomes now. They want you to continue to outperform with the clinical outcomes. That's first and foremost. And patient experience is another one. And quite frankly, I have had the experience of putting that model that was just described in place on one nursing unit here at Candler Hospital. And the patient satisfaction is amazing with that model versus just an RN PCT kind of model. But what Magnet really wants is for you to set goals for yourself and to achieve those goals. It really doesn't say you have to have it all BSN staff or any of that.
But my thought as well with med tech or with another similar type position is it allows the RN to work more top of his or her license as well as the LPN.
Yep.
And then take just the routine, that one task, if we could find other tasks just to take away with different positions.
Yeah, I think it'll be important as this playbook is created to get insight and feedback from different organizations who are doing different care models. To be able to pull that together and show various examples of what that looks like.
Okay, any other questions or comments on E14? All right, so that completes our the 5 additional levers we wanted to present today, and it brings us to the final 10. These final 10 levers could still potentially have impact, especially if you combine them with other levers that we've discussed. These are the levers that we're going to share with you so that you can have some offline review. We'll be in contact on any feedback or insights you want to provide on these levers, but and I won't read them to you, but I'll leave them here so that you can review the offline consideration, the levers for offline consideration.
I think as we kind of round out today's conversation dialogue, I think, so what we'll do is kind of go back and reassimilate what we've heard today. I think I've started to hear some themes on where there's a lot of alignment, recognizing that not everything that's up here can go in a final report or recommendation. So we'll go back and take another look at what we heard today and heard some consensus around in conjunction with where there's the most opportunity potentially for state involvement or things that might need some consideration for potential funding. Again, we'll have some follow-up conversations with each of you. Certainly feel free if you have thoughts after today to reach out. I've taken some notes on some things that I want to follow up on with a couple of you. I mean, we've got, is it, I guess, 2 weeks?
Yep.
2 weeks. Where we'll meet again, really with the hope of having some sort of a draft. And there will be things kind of left on the cutting room floor, right? Like, I think in my perspective, and certainly want to hear your feedback of what you all envision, but I know the charge that we were originally kind of given with this is, again, to remain practical and specific. And I think the more that we can find some things, if it's board rules within the Board of Nursing that really need to be looked at, those are very practical things. Whether or not we can compel them to change them, I don't know, but we can put it out there in writing very specifically, or loan forgiveness, or maybe further exploration of DEUs or some of these other things. I think the more specific we can get, I'm not envisioning a 50-page report. I think that's something very concise that we can then deliver to the governor and to other policymakers, that these are the actionable items that we can do right now to either have some immediate effect or some midterm or long-term impact in terms of increasing the pipeline and to getting us there, how we kind of Band-Aid it together and get there. So with that kind of framework in mind, we'll certainly bring you back a draft. I fully anticipate some tweaks after the 12th, obviously, but I would say, just want to pause for a moment and have any other conversation or thoughts on what that final work product looks like from all of y'all's lenses.
One question is on the State Board of Nursing, that is sort of weaves through a lot of this activity and regulations and requirements. And we heard them talk at the last at the session in Albany. Is there an opportunity to have a recommendation going forward of a collaborative group that would we've got a lot of folks here, that I imagine, especially from our academic institutions, that, I think could offer some realistic suggestions of how the State Board of Nursing could assist, and how they could, some changes that might help everyone and help this in general. So is there we're not going to accomplish that during this period or in the next 2 weeks, but, perhaps going forward, is there an appointed group or a panel, maybe not a commission, but that really works with
function? I don't know if they have an advisory group. I think that's pretty easy for us to consider and think about, or how functional or integral that group is. But I think there is some stuff in there. Certainly we've heard that, but then Sherry, I've heard a lot from you in particular, I think about, and even when they came and presented to us, there's a difference between what's in board rule that could be changed, but yet there's another layer of accreditation on top of that we don't want to be an outlier state necessarily, or that we don't want to jeopardize someone else's, but perhaps there's a way to suggest language that's flexible and permissive without requiring someone to choose one way or the other. So that's tricky, right? But I think that's a great idea, Scott. I think that's an easy thing.
And of course, I'm passionate about nursing and I do think that's a huge area of opportunity. But I have to tell you, of all of the presentations that we've had, the one that really stood out for me was with the EMTs. We were talking about that earlier. It's actually very scary to think that you might need EMT support and you have to wait, 30 or 40 minutes, when you're truly having an emergency. So I want to make sure that that doesn't get lost and buried under nursing. Again, passionate about nursing. We've had great conversation, but I definitely think that's an area that I would like us to have had more opportunity to delve into. Because I know when I call, I want them to show up.
I want them to show up well trained.
I would like them to show up well trained.
60 of them, right?
60 of them.
I think the same, the Board of Nursing issues are very, important. I think the same is true with the licensed professional counselors, mental health practitioners. It's such a need for mental health services, and there seems to be some obstruction, or not deliberate, but something that delays actual full practice. I think they need to look at those regulations to allow them to have a full license, continue in the mentoring, continue in a relationship where they get whatever it is that the profession feels it needs, but get them out, because they're in just outside of metropolitan Atlanta and urban areas in rural communities, there are very few mental health services. And, it's you don't want bad practitioners, but you want somebody.
Commissioner, one other item is just on the data, right? Of having it, but then having it be reliable and having an owner of it for the state going forward, and something we've talked about. And I'm sure there's quite a few organizations that are dying to do that, to be that owner of that going forward. But I think we would have not done a bit of a disservice if we make these recommendations and we get things going, but in a year or two, we're not able to say, were we successful? How bad, has it gotten worse? And so is there going to be a clearinghouse for good data around workforce shortages, whether it's in nursing or physicians or EMTs? So we know if we're successful, and if we are, then how do we, accelerate those? And if we're not, how can we better speak to those challenges?
Might call you about that.
Okay.
Continue that conversation.
Happy.
Other thoughts? And St. Joseph Candler, Sherry and team here, Dr. Hinchy, this was great. Thank you guys for participating and being active and involved. We certainly have our work cut out for us again to take everything from here. You'll be hearing from us. And then we look forward to seeing you on the 12th, which is really soon. We'll send out obviously logistical information and things from Sean, but look forward to having you all back in Atlanta. For those of you who can make it, I'm sure we'll have I don't know if this is Zoom, whatever this is, Zoom or Teams or whatever link available again, but hope that you can join us again, and look forward to rounding this out and getting to some good recommendations. So thank you so much for being here. Thanks for everybody else that showed up and folks that are online. Appreciate it. Safe travels.
Thank you so much.